I tell you what, I'm going to get started. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Greensboro Chamber of Commerce's Daily Action Call. I'm Deborah Hoover, the COO for the Chamber, and it's my pleasure to be your host today. We would love to have you also follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find us using @GSO Chamber for the latest information. And we'll also continue to send out a post-call communication to our members with a recording of the call and any relevant links. If you're not a member and you're joining us today, welcome. Please know that all links to resources and the recordings will be on our website at greensboro.org/COVID-19. So before we get going, I have two really important asks of everyone. We have been asking for the last 10 weeks, but please fill out your 2020 U.S. Census form and encourage others to do the same. We really need to make sure that we have a strong completion rate, not only here in Guilford County, but for North Carolina. That's just to make sure that we get the additional congressional seats and additional federal funding that we need and deserve based on our growth since the last census back in 2010. And I'll ask Holly if she can put that link in the chat room. My second request is just to let you all know that we do have a shortage of blood supplies here in our community, and these will be needed as Cone Health prepares to ramp up its elective surgeries and medical procedures. So please consider donating blood to the organization called One Blood. And I'll ask Holly to also put that information in the chat room. I want to thank our Circle of Champions partners. They support our programming year-round and enable us to bring programming like this to you today. If we've got a slide, that's great. If not, I'm going to just call them all out. At the platinum level, we have a Legacy Federal Credit Union, Cone Health, Lincoln Financial Group, Truliant Federal Credit Union, VF Corporation. At the gold level, we have Navant Health, and at the silver level, we have Global Brands Group, Kelly Office Solutions, Ralph Lauren, Staunton Capital, and Wake Forest Baptist Health. So today we're going back to a very popular topic, and we're going to hit the refresh button because there's some updates that need to be shared. And I'm talking about the Paycheck Protection Program, or as we all know it now, PPP loans, and how to get forgiveness of these loans. So I just saw a report today, and for North Carolina, through May 1st, we've had 56,512 PPP loans made that total almost $4.3 billion. So I did a quick calculation, and the average loan is about $76,000. So that's a lot of small businesses and nonprofits that have taken advantage of that relief option. So with us today to be our experts on this subject, I'd like to introduce them now. Scott Baker, who's president of TowneBank of the Triad. Nathan Duggins, director and attorney with Tuggle Duggins. Jimmy Eggers, tax partner with Smith Leonard, and Daniel Stratton, associate attorney with Tuggle Duggins. Thank you all for being with us today. We appreciate it. And as a reminder for everybody on the call, please put any questions that you have in the chat room, and we will get to those. So as I said, we've got a lot to cover, so let's get started. Scott, I'm going to start with you because I really want to set up the framework for our discussion today. So first of all, can businesses still get a PPP loan? I know that there was an expectation that the second round of PPP funding would also go quickly, just like the first phase of that funding. So can businesses and nonprofits still get that PPP loan?
Thank you, Deborah. Yes, the funds are still available. As of the last report I saw was through May 16th. There was still over $100 billion of the $300 billion that was recently allotted for round two remaining. As you mentioned, a lot of anticipation on round two was that it was going to move rather quickly. The loan sizes, the average loan size has been much reduced from what it was in round one. And we think that, along with some of the pacing of the applications, have allowed this round two to last much longer. So we're well into, I think it's week 3 now of round two. And there is still over $100 billion remaining in funds available for applicants.
Okay, great. So knowing that, could you briefly describe the PPP loan application process and what a borrower has to do and what the lender has to do?
Yes, as with any government program, it's hard to be brief. That said, there are a few things that I would recommend for folks. Number one is go to Treasury, www.treasury.gov/cares. There's a link that says Assistance for Small Businesses. And when you click on that, it will take you to a wealth of information on the Paycheck Protection Program. There's an application right there on that webpage that is the loan application for the PPP. Every small business will complete the same application regardless of what financial institution they're applying at. It doesn't matter. Everyone is using the exact same application. So first of all is to review and complete the application. Then you're going to want to gather the information that you will need for the calculation of your loan amount, and that is your payroll data for your company. So depending on whether you're everything from a sole prop to a C Corp, there's going to have some variances in what payroll data is going to be required. But that data is important because your loan amount is calculated based on 2.5 months of your average payroll for the cycle that you use. And so rather than going through all those details here, all that is available on the website, or certainly reach out to your CPA, advisor, lender, and they can help guide you with what's required. But you will need to get that payroll data together. And then you will likely need to work with your lender. Some lenders have a unique worksheet that they'd like you to complete in order to support the loan calculations to make it easier to validate that the numbers on the application compare up to the data that you've provided. So you may have a loan worksheet to complete, and then you'll need to make sure that you have all of the supporting documentation around your calculations. So that would be 941 payroll reports, payroll processing reports from a third-party provider. It would be annual payroll reports, all that information. If you're a sole prop, one of the things that's been confusing, or an independent contractor, you will need to complete and have your Schedule C for 2019, even if you have not filed it yet. So you'll still need to have it completed and able to turn that in to the lender, because they will use your net income off of the Schedule C if you're a sole prop or independent contractor in lieu of payroll reports. So I hope that answers the question.
That's great, Scott. So I am going to ask all of our panelists, what have been the top issues that borrowers have had some trouble with regard to the PPP loan application process?
Deborah, I can start with that. This is the voice of Nathan. And I was, as I was listening to Scott's comments, I was thinking about what was if you had to inventory the question that was asked most. And we've been asked a lot of questions, and Daniel can probably help on this too, because Daniel's been leading our effort on getting a lot of e-blasts out to our client. But I think the one, at least initially, that was asked was about the good faith certification on the SBA loan. That quickly morphed, or it felt maybe not quickly, but over a couple of weeks that morphed into what I would call the LA Lake problem, which was, did I have to use other sources of capital before I sought this loan? And then I think everybody, or many people on the call, may remember that last week they came back out and said, provided clarity on that put a lot of people at risk. So at the beginning, it was the certification in the loan that your business was being impacted. And I may ask Daniel to talk a little bit about question we get from a lot of clients, which is, what are the things I need to be inventorying right now in a memo or some sort of internal document to be able to go back to if somebody asks, was my business impacted? And so, Daniel, I know we've spent a lot of time talking about that. Why don't you field that, and then maybe we can get Jimmy's response to that same question.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the biggest thing that we've been kind of telling people is to go ahead and document your reason for needing the loan now. In the event that you get audited or the SBA has questions down the line, they're probably going to give more weight to your contemporaneous thinking about why your business was impacted, as opposed to you kind of posts after the fact, trying to justify it. So, look, even if it's not anything you need to file with the SBA, but it would be helpful to just have kind of a memorandum on hand that says, our sales we have gone down, or we anticipate them to go down, based on, these specific factors. We may end up having to lay people off in the absence of being able to get this money. If we have this funding, it'll allow us to not reduce employee hours, and kind of lay out kind of just your thought process on what you need the money for. And supporting documentation to go along with that. Obviously, you need to be keeping track of your payroll costs currently and for the 2019 period. It's basically just you want to create a paper trail now, so you can clearly go back and say if there are questions down the line, because there is a lot of uncertainty, and it might be that you anticipate needing the money, and then it ends up not, the severity might not be as bad as you ultimately anticipated for your company. So you want to be able to say, yeah, even though it might not have been as bad as we initially thought, here's why we thought it would be, and here are all the valid reasons why we had that thought. So that's really the biggest piece of advice I could say is, just document early and comprehensively, why you think you need it.
Great advice. Jimmy.
So I would echo both of their comments. We've been advising clients to talk to their attorneys, make sure to be documenting their permanent files with the same things that the fellows were just saying now. From my angle, the issues early on were the rapidity, that the quick and hasteness of releasing these funds, and knowing that it was going to be like a Rolling Stones concert, that the first people in line got the funds, and in 15 minutes it was going to be tapped out. And at that time, there was a lot of wonky rules in there in terms of when the payroll period was going to be, whether certain federal income tax and federal insurance contribution act taxes were going to be deducted from or not deducted from. So for me, it was just utter chaos for the first 7 days, just trying to advise people, because at that point in time, all we really had was the face of the law. And it wasn't until the SBA finally released that application that we at least got a little bit of clarity, very little. And then, as they've mentioned, it's kind of evolved from that. Unfortunately, they've changed the rule book as we've moved forward with this thing. So much so that I think us CPAs and attorneys are, in ways, we're happy about it, because we're able to advise clients, and that means a little bit more revenue for us, right? But it has been very frustrating to clients, and I would say that it's been incredibly frustrating to clients that are getting more than $2 million in loans. So that would be my comments to it.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Yep.
Are there still clarifications that will be coming out, or are we pretty much there on the application process and just what all's involved with getting this loan?
Let me touch that first, Deborah. So one of the things that I think is still unanswered is if you have a 401k plan that has a matching component or a profit sharing component to it, and you're trying to figure out what portion of that employer expense, not the employee match, not the money that's being put in by the employee, but the employer match or the profit sharing, what portion of that should be included in your forgiveness calculation. And that's, of course, balanced against the idea that most companies right now are in a cash preservation mode, right? You're trying to, and many companies are thinking, just like in 08, 09, hey, I'm going to scale down my 401k plan. I'm going to take some steps to eliminate the match temporarily. We are hopeful that in the next couple weeks, we're going to get some clarity. Remember that at the beginning, it wasn't clear if a retirement contribution was included in the $100,000 annualized cap. Then we learned that it was not, which was good, meaning you can seek some more forgiveness. More employee-related costs are going to be included in the forgiveness. But I think there's still some question as to whether or not is that just the amount of wages that you have during the 8-week period, is that or if you do the match during the 8-week period for the entire plan year, can that be included in the forgiveness? And there's not any definitive answers on that. And I think the thing that's frustrating to people is it is likely that people are having to make decisions in the absence of information. And that's the ultimate difficulty here, is that it's just hard to know what to do with your existing employee base, with your retirement plan, with your healthcare plan, without knowing a lot of those answers. When Daniel and I were prepping for this call a few minutes ago, I described it, and I think this is pretty accurate. We have more answers than we have maybe 2 weeks ago, but we don't have all the answers. And so I really encourage everybody. Deborah, you mentioned the treasury.gov website. I mean, that's really the go-to. Every morning, and Daniel does this probably twice a day, we check the FAQ for an update. And I think we're at 49, Daniel, is that right?
Yeah, 48, 49.
And that has been a really good source of clarification. It doesn't always apply to your company. Sometimes it's about something that doesn't apply to you. But that's been a really good place to look. And I think they'll continue to update the FAQs as we go through this period.
Good. Jimmy, were you going to add something?
I think we have this 8-week period of time post receipt of the loan, right? But what I'm hopeful for is that there are certain industries that are not going to be able to go live with their business here. You know, in North Carolina, we're waiting to hear at 5 o'clock tonight from the governor to see if we're going to go into phase 2. You know, I own a restaurant, for instance, and it's, you know, we're probably doing 35 or 40% of our revenues. And we've tried to staff up and get everybody back. But, you know, frankly, the folks are making more on the unemployment dole than here. It would be nice if there was a little bit of leniency on that 8-week period of time for certain industries. That's one piece. And then recently read an editorial or an aspect of the frequently asked questions that were talking about bonuses, in particular for owners. And what it was silent to was to these LLCs and partnerships that have owner-operators that maybe haven't taken any guaranteed payments over the course of the last couple of years because they're trying to make sure their business is solvent and make sure their business is successful. It sure would be nice to have some leniency there for some of these owners to be able to take guaranteed payments for services that they had performed for the last couple of years. And those would be my only comments here.
Okay. So I'm so glad that we first brought up this whole certification issue and concern. Just one last question about that. Scott, will the lenders seek verifiable proof that the loans were necessary? Is there a role that the lenders have to play in that?
No, Deborah, there really isn't. That responsibility is with the borrower. We're not going to ask for a document outside of what they've already assigned in the application where they are tested to that there was a need, and that's when they applied for it. And as they submit their forgiveness application, which is out and available now for folks to review, as they submit that forgiveness application, there's going to be documents required to support what that calculation was for forgiveness, but there isn't anything specific around that attestation individually.
Okay, so Scott, I'm so glad that you did mention the application for forgiveness. So, you know, I printed out the document, the SBA document, Form 3508. and it's 11 pages. So my first look at this document is that it looks a lot more complicated than I think the borrowers may have originally thought that this was going to be. So let's talk about this application. Scott, why don't you talk to me about what the lenders are going to be looking for with regard to this application and what role the lenders play in making sure that it's complete?
Okay, so you're right. It's an 11-page.
Oops, I think we've got an audio issue with Scott.
Document.
Scott, I think we have an audio issue. Let me ask one of our other panelists to talk about the forgiveness application. Jimmy, would you like to take that? Well, let me see if I can unmute you. There you go.
Okay, good. Yeah, it's going to be painful. I think just today I've seen 6 or 7 iterations of the spreadsheet that is kind of a jungle to figure out how to calculate, how to quantify that forgiveness. I know that at Smith Leonard, what we're trying to do is we're trying to offer help with that, because I think, frankly, it's a good time of year by and large for a CPA firm. And so we've got some people to help, and this is going to be clunky, cumbersome, and I hate Scott's off, but I'm sure the banks are going to be looking for lots and lots of documentation in support of that spreadsheet for the forgiveness calculations. But I think by and large, it's going to be very challenging, and I think that the banks are going to have their hands full in acting in somewhat an enforcement fashion for the Small Business Administration. I don't know. It's going to be interesting. We're going to have a lot of man hours in it. I know that, and that's the plan. Really, is these folks are trying to manage their business and trying to keep everything afloat. So we're going to offer to come in and try to take care of this little function for them. The folks that are real small businesses don't have the CFOs, the controllers, or accounting managers that can handle that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, I anticipate it's going to be very cumbersome.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Scott. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
right.
okay. Yeah, I heard what Jimmy's absolutely accurate. And I think that what you're going to have for borrowers is, first of all, I recommend that they take the time to read through the document a couple times, number one. Number two, they definitely should be seeking additional counsel to ensure that they are completing accurate. So B, there are a lot of that I believe those who are accountants or familiar with IRS governing rules or other items are going to be secondhand. But for the standard business owner who's working through and that top of some additional clarity upon it. Again, I think Nathan has said seeking additional counsel is going to be advised. And then patience, as Jimmy indicated, I do believe that as much as some of the loan application created complexity, there's more complexity within the forgiveness with the FTE retention, the wage reduction clauses, and then along with the supporting documentation that are going to be needed for the rent or utilities or mortgage interest, along with the payroll, which was the only item that was really required in the loan application phase. So you got a lot more data coming in, and I just think there needs to be really good and fluid dialogue between your banker and yourself to make sure that you can go and have that openness around any items that are needed, why, what additional, and again, referencing a CPA, legal advisor, in additional support. So it's going to be a cumbersome process. It's going to be a little clunky, as Jimmy indicated, and I think it's going to be really important that people just take their time, read through, seek advice, and be patient in it.
Scott, I think you're exactly right. And I am going to state the obvious. This is what I've read. So that PPP borrowers must apply for loan forgiveness with the lender that processed their PPP loan, correct? Oh, I think he went back on mute. Yeah. Just so everybody knows, Scott is traveling, so if it feels like his audio is in slow-mo sometimes, just know that he is on the road.
Oh, I thought that was just him, Deborah.
I don't think so. I think he's a little bit quicker than that. Scott, you don't have to take that.
Yeah, but Deborah, that's right. You've got to, if you went to Bank of America for the application, you don't go back to Truist for the forgiveness. Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So just stating the obvious. And I think that we've all talked a lot about one of the most complicated parts of the forgiveness application is around payroll, right? Because originally they said that, 75% of the loan proceeds had to be used for payroll and payroll related costs that were eligible. So does anybody have anything else that they want to add around the types of expenses that are considered for eligibility for forgiveness? Jimmy?
Sure. There is kind of a wild card because kind of in that bill they had mentioned, well, obviously they have the rent, the utilities, and then they have rent and utilities and interest costs, interest on mortgages that were in place at February 15th. But then buried in there as well as travel costs. And we've yet to really see anything that elaborates on that travel cost. As a matter of fact, Scott has a separate group of us that talk about PPP and challenges. We call it a PPP support group. And we talk about a lot of this stuff, but those are your primary that, to your point, fall in that 25% bucket, but no more than, the way you got to look at this thing is you can't have any more than 75% of the loan apportioned or allocated to that payroll cost bucket, which includes the payroll, the health insurance, state and local unemployment taxes, and then the retirement contributions. So, and on top of that, we have this incurred kind of language in the law where it has to be incurred and paid. So you can't go and prepay 2 years worth of rent. You can't go and prepay a couple months worth of utilities. It has to have been incurred. So those are some things that you got to watch out for here.
That's great advice. Nathan, Daniel, anything you'd like to add?
Let me mention something that we're giving this advice that I think for hopefully for many on the phone, it's not too late to do this, but we're encouraging folks to segregate the PPP money and keep a separate ledger of not commingle it with your control account or whatever your general operating account, so that when it does come time to seek forgiveness, you've got a pretty easy way of generating all the expenses that you've incurred and how you've paid them. I agree with Jimmy. The incurred versus paid has been a challenge, but I think we got a little clarity on that last week. And where maybe you can start with your first payroll after receiving the loan amount, or you can start on the day you receive the loan amount, and they've given us a little bit of flexibility. And then I would also echo something Jimmy said a few minutes ago about, I think we're going to see some changes about when the 8-week period can happen, or maybe even expanding the period to a longer period so more folks can take advantage of the loan, meaning they can actually get their employees back working and pay them. I mean, that's the objective of this program. And then finally, one of the questions that we get a lot is, can I do this? Can I do that? Kind of what Jimmy was talking about on the travel question. We constantly are telling people, if it feels wrong, that's kind of like the good faith test, not the good faith certification, but just general good faith. Let that feeling guide you a little bit. If it feels like you're doing too much or you're overreaching, you probably are. And of course, I'd encourage you to talk to your accountant or your lawyer or whoever handles your professional services. But I always tell people that there's a reason that feeling generates in your stomach, because it's telling you, hey, maybe pump the brakes here a little bit. And that's going to be true through this process, this forgiveness process.
One of the things that I do want just to make sure we get answered is, you've got your PPP loan, you want to get forgiveness. When are you required to file that application for forgiveness?
Daniel, I know you can't file it before June 30th. I don't know is there an outside date too?
I believe there was in the statute. I don't recall that number off the top of my head. I can probably find it and tell you in just a second, though.
Okay, that'd be great.
Daniel, this is Scott. I don't know if you can hear me again, Deborah, but
We can.
I remember in the statute it was talking about that once you've applied, a decision has to be made within 60 days by the lender. But I don't believe there was a requirement that borrowers have to apply within, quote unquote, 15 days of completing the 8-week period. I didn't see any timelines relative to that. So
sorry, that actually was what I was thinking of. That's correct. It was the amount of time for the lender to approve the forgiveness that I was thinking of was in the bill.
Right. So I think what I would encourage borrowers to do is gather, as Nathan said, segregate an account is an excellent idea. Be collecting the information as you go. Get your payroll reports, get statements from your utilities, have a copy of your lease prepared and ready to share, that you can show that it was in place before February 15th, that you had the expenses for it. There's certain steps you can be taking throughout so that when your 8 weeks is completed and you've got your last payroll processing report, you can go engage your lender and start completing the application and get it submitted. My advice would be, you want to do it as efficiently as you can without sacrificing accuracy. Jimmy and Nathan both indicated, I fully expect that there will be some additional guidance and clarity questions, maybe a forgiveness FAQ, much like there's been an FAQ we've been following along for the loan application. And there could be some advantage of getting some of that clarity before you rush to submit day 1, day 2 in the process, because there could be some things that, as Nathan mentioned, that we find out around retirement costs or other benefit costs or other events that you could have included and may not have initially without that understanding.
Scott,
and one additional point to remember on that is that the June 30th is a deadline for getting a safe harbor period for reductions in forgiveness based on reducing your employees. So for a lot of people, you're not going to want to submit your application until after June 30th, because you're going to want to see what your full-time equivalent number of employees is at that point.
Exactly right. Yeah.
And just to make sure everybody knows, the 8-week period starts when you get your loan proceeds. Is that correct?
Well, it is and it is not. It is, and by the rule, absolutely, your 8-week cover period begins the day your loan was funded. However, as I think Nathan mentioned, they have as part of the forgiveness application identified an alternative covered payroll period just for your payroll expenses that allows you to start your first day of your 8-week period with the first day of your first pay period following your closing of your PPP loan. So it's a lot of firsts in there.
Okay.
Again, but there is basically to line up your payroll period with your PPP loan if you pay biweekly or more frequently than that.
Okay, that makes sense, Scott, that they would try and clarify that. And I was also hearing, and Scott, I think you mentioned this, yes, the rules may continue to change a little bit, so don't necessarily be in a hurry. I did hear something last week that there may be some easing of the 75%, 25% as well. And some of this is because there are employees that are not returning to work, and there may be a little more latitude given for the companies to be able to claim more non-payroll related expenses that are eligible. Anybody want to comment on that?
Yeah, and particularly in your Deborah, in your high rent markets like New York, San Francisco, LA, Atlanta, where their rent is outrageous. You know, for a community like ours, I think it's less of a concern, but there's certainly been talk about that, and I think we may see some changes. Although, you know, I hope you don't cut the television on and watch the nightly news, because it might make you pull your hair out. But if you do, you're seeing, you know, the House has passed a bill now that actually makes some corrections to that, and who knows what it ends up being, or if it ends up being a law. But I do think we're going to see some changes there. Although one thing I want Daniel to talk through, Daniel, talk through if you make a job offer to an employee and they don't come back for reasons, one of which might be because they're making more money through unemployment right now. That won't always be the case, but right now it is. What the consequence of that is.
Yeah, so the original text of the bill basically made it sound like if your number of full-time equivalent employees dropped for any reason, your amount of forgiveness could also go down. So one of the updates in the last couple of weeks to the FAQ has made clear that if you have furloughed or laid off an employee during, I think, the February 15th to April 26th window, and you offer them a job to come back to their job, and they decline, that won't impact your forgiveness. That employee essentially just gets removed from the calculation altogether. The one requirement is you want to make sure that the offer to come back is in writing, and that you have documented that the employee has refused to come back. So as long as you have that paper trail, that should help prevent that reduction in forgiveness.
That's an important point. Good to know. Thank you for that. All right. I do want to introduce this whole idea of other relief options and how it impacts PPP. So, you know, for borrowers who also received what is known as an economic disaster, injury disaster emergency grant, if you will. Does that come into the forgiveness calculation as well? And if so, how does it?
Yeah, I can jump in, Deborah. This is Scott. So if you received an EIDL grant, that on the loan forgiveness application itself, it asks for that information, and that amount would be deducted from your overall forgiveness as part of your PPP loan. If you just think about it this way, it's as simple as...
Oops, I think we're in slow-mo again, Scott.
They don't want to, they being the U.S. government, to have a forgivable grant option through the EIDL. Right there. Can you hear me now better or no?
Yes.
Can you hear me now, Deborah?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. So what I was pointing to, the U.S. government doesn't want to provide a grant via the economic injury disaster loan in the full forgiveness as part of the PPP. They're going to ask for you to reduce your PPP forgiveness by any amount you received in the EIDL grant.
Okay.
So, and it's listed on the application.
Got it. All right. Well, if anyone who is on the call has questions, please be sure to put them in the chat room. And again, we'll be glad to ask our panelists to answer your questions. I'm going to just ask for, I'm not seeing any questions at this point, so I'm just going to ask our panelists for, you know, their top advice, each of them, as our PPP borrowers go into this phase of forgiveness, asking for their loan forgiveness. So I tell you what, Nathan, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so I'm going to repeat a couple things and I'm going to say a new thing. Okay, so the things I'm going to repeat are use your good faith and judgment when you're completing the forgiveness form, and make sure that you talk to your bank, to your CPA when you've got some questions, but don't under ask either, right? You want to make sure that you're taking full advantage of the program. So I would start with that. Number two, I would say waiting a little bit on the forgiveness might make some sense because I think we're going to get some more information. And so I think Scott mentioned trying to be patient in this process. I know that can be frustrating because everybody's trying to run a business, but I think trying to be thoughtful about what might come could help you get a better outcome. And then the last thing I would
become very clear.
Yeah, the last thing I would mention, I want to just lift up the banking system, particularly the community banking system. They had done an amazing job of getting this money out on the street. We were all right there at the beginning, and the hours that the banks were working around the clock, literally around the clock. And I'm bragging on Scott's organization a little bit, but they had people working 24/7 to get all the applications pumped into the SBA system. I mean, that's kind of been an unsung part of this. I wanted to lift that up because it's important. It really made a big difference for people.
Thank you, Nathan. And I'm glad you brought that up because I know it's true. I have heard that myself. All right, Jimmy, your top advice.
Hi, sorry about that. I'm going to repeat what Nathan said earlier. I'm going to say that my top advice is the good faith advice, right? Is documentation of everything, making sure all those ducks are in a row, and I do it now. I think I don't want to oversimplify it because the calculation's not that easy, but the calculation is what it is, right? So I think that while that will be a cumbersome process, I think you got to be prepared on the defensive for down the road when and if the SBA does produce the manpower necessary to come audit all this stuff. So I would say having your permanent file documents in place, talking to those attorneys in particular, and getting those minutes documented, getting any hazard pay or bonus pay documented, all of that stuff being documented in your minutes and putting it in your permanent file documents. Best offense is a good defense kind of thing. So
Great advice. Great advice. Okay, Daniel.
Yeah, I mean, just to echo that, like I said earlier, documentation, I think, is definitely going to be the best thing to do. And also just keep an eye out on what's coming out of SBA and Treasury. I mean, they're updating things every day. There are still questions. I mean, they only this past weekend finally defined what a full-time equivalent employee is. And that created more questions than it actually answered. So there will be additional guidance to kind of navigate these things. So, don't be afraid to talk to your advisors and to keep an eye out yourself for that additional guidance.
Couldn't agree with you more, Daniel. And I will say that as we learn and about new updates, we will be keeping our own website updated with those resources. So please keep checking with us as well, because we'll continue to post updates. All right, Scott, top advice from you.
Yeah, okay, hopefully you can hear me well, but here's a couple things. One, I would tell individuals to take your time and make sure you do seek additional advice. As Jimmy and Nathan indicated, there are all kinds of resources for this PPP. If you go to YouTube, you can find 200 videos on PPP. You can find 100 videos on PPP forgiveness. I'm not advising that. I am asking everyone to make sure that you get to a trusted advisor, take the time, spend some resources to make sure you get it right and accurate, because it's important enough to do that. You don't want to just pull a YouTube video on PPP forgiveness, complete it, and think you have all the understanding around it. So one is make sure you're seeking the right counsel, you're spending time with your lender, you're getting good communication, and you're taking your time to make sure that you get it accurate and take, as Nathan indicated, take full advantage of the program for your business.
Thank you, Scott. Excellent advice. I did have one question that came to me. It's on a different relief option, but I'm just going to share this question, and it was concerning the employee retention tax credit that's available under the CARES Act. Again, it's a different relief option that encourages business to take advantage of it. And this person is asking, how does someone apply for this credit? Now, I can share with you that if you use a payroll service to process your payroll, they know what to do, and they have actually a form that you have to complete that authorizes them to start taking advantage of that. But I'm going to open it up to Jimmy, Nathan, and Daniel on this particular one.
So I'll speak real quick. My understanding with that is that they're adjusting the Form 941 to a certain extent to show the credit amounts for folks that are qualifying for that particular credit in particular. And I think the way mechanically, and Daniel, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but mechanically the way that works is you just hold back the taxes that you would have deposited, certain taxes, and then you show that as a credit or a reduction on your Form 941 to get down to what your true tax deposits and or liability should have been. That's my understanding, Deborah.
Thank you, Daniel.
And that's my understanding as well. And I think it was said, but just to be clear, you can't get that credit if you have a PPP loan. So it's an either
right.
or thing. So
that is correct. It is either or. Also, it's my understanding that let's say that you have more of a credit due than what your payroll taxes were, that you can apply for a refund. And there's a special form for that. So.
And I think they fast-tracked that, Deborah, so that money would flow quick
Yes.
back into the economy. But yeah, that's true. You can't apply for a refund.
All right. Well, gentlemen, I cannot thank you enough for being our expert panelists today. You have done just a fabulous job. We are so, so grateful. I do want to thank everybody who joined us on the call today. We really did want to bring our daily action call series to just end it on a high. And it's been our pleasure, privilege to host them for our community. And like any popular TV series, we may have a spinoff series, especially from our Try It Tuesday, and then some one-time specials on an ad-needed basis. So I can think of one that we may already want to host. So as we come back, we're going to make sure to let everybody know on our social media platforms and in our member newsletters when those Zoom calls will be held. Tomorrow morning, please plan to join us for our virtual coffee and conversation that starts at 9 a.m. We're going to hear from Dabney Sanders, who's the project leader for the Downtown Greenway project. She's going to give an update on the progress being made on the Greenway's completion. And I know that all of us are so excited about having the Greenway completed. And I know I can't wait to go around that complete loop when it's finished. And then tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock, I want to make everybody aware of a special call that will be hosted by the Guilford County Workforce Development Board. And this call is going to focus on the Workforce Development Board's services, especially those business services that we all need to know about and that we need to share with others. And I know that we're going to have our CEO, Brett Christensen, on the call, as well as Patrick Chapin, the CEO of Business High Point Chamber. You know, as we know, Thursday's when the national unemployment claims information is released, so this topic is going to be very timely. So I hope everybody has a great rest of your day and certainly a wonderful upcoming Memorial Day weekend. Thank you all.